you should be mapping your investment proportional to your expected return. And if you don't, your competitors are, and you're left holding the bag, paying full price for discount traffic, and you'll see 80% of your spend gobbled up by the mobile traffic. Meanwhile, the computer traffic, which will generally still convert far more effectively than mobile for most sites, is drops down to 10 or even less percent of the total budget, which is not in the customer's, in the client's best interests, and not like in the shopper's best interests either.
Welcome to the Winning E-commerce Experience Show. And now your host, Shahram Anver.
Hey guys, our guest today has spent years in e-commerce as a retailer, and then he jumped the fence to start a paid search agency to help other e-commerce companies grow profitably. Roy Steves, great to have you with us.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
So we were just talking about how we're in such an unprecedented time and how everything's changing. Like we've even changed the format of this podcast. Seems like adapting is the way to go right now.
Yeah, I believe some clever person once said that that adaptation is the most important factor in determining whether a species will persist, is how quickly they can adapt to change. I imagine that'll be true for us as well.
I know. I mean, e-commerce even more so, right? Because things are just exploding in some areas and just completely dead in other areas, and maybe like you've got that middle segment that's kind of trying to figure it out. I guess each person, regardless of if you're exploding or if you're almost dead, you've got challenges, I think, with it. So it's almost like you kind of need to really like define the problem that you're facing so that you know exactly what to solve.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in an account that might be blowing up right now, if you can't keep up with fulfillment in the warehouse, it doesn't matter how clever your paid search agency is, for example. And so, identifying the short-term bottlenecks is a massive distinction. So that's, when I'm talking to clients right now, it's much about what's going on their side as what's going on in the accounts, because all of that context is just so much more urgent than it would typically be.
So, like I was reading through your bio, right? Like, was there this moment that came up when you were a retailer, and you thought, you know what, I'm going to get into paid search? Like, was it this aha thing, or was it just this thing that kept happening and then you just sort of a gradual transition?
A little from column A, but there was definitely a Band-Aid ripping off point. So I was recently moved to Arizona at the time. Came in when Pool Supply World was bought by Leslie's Pool Supplies, and so went from being a little 20 to 40 person during my 10-year team in California, selling pool pumps on the internet, and then all of a sudden we came in sideways and took over the website, merged the teams and the like, and so we were suddenly a part of a 900 plus store national brick and mortar, big company, sort of grown up business from our perspective, and so I was having a lot of fun with the sheer amount of data that they had available, and that's sort of my thing. Is I'm good at ad hoc informal analysis as an individual contributor. That's sort of my strength, and so I was playing around in that pool for quite some time, no pun intended actually, and eventually things started to smooth out, and I was focusing on at least a little bit on speaking at conferences and networking, things like that, just because I like talking shop. So so with a little bit of time and no longer going through the crunch of the acquisition and due diligence and moving and all of that, I was having fun with that, and because I was putting myself out there, I had just inquiries out of the blue for help, like, hey, I saw you on this this track at e-tail, or I read your blog article on this, and so, being no reason not to help, I would start to help, and I provided some advice here and advice there, and eventually started having little clients on retainers in the
hey, I'm pretty good at this.
Yeah, exactly. And so then Shiloh, my co-founder, and I ended up having a pint while I was visiting up and doing a short-term, just 2-day consult on site to go over their paid search, among other things. And the conversation felt a little bit like an awkward first date. Like, we were just sort of like getting a sense, we both knew like we weren't really learning as quickly as we were accustomed to, and the opportunity was right to make changes, and so we were looking at joining forces, and it seemed like a good opportunity. So we spun it up. Just
So
sort
he
of
was doing something similar on his own.
yeah. At the time, I believe he was selling golf equipment online, also pure play e-commerce, and so it was originally just, we probably ran it like that for 6 months, just in the background, just in our free time, because it takes, somebody with a lot of experience can accomplish 80% of what you need done in a very short period of time. Pareto's distribution definitely applies to that kind of thing, and so for a few hours of our time here and there, we could save those people dozens of hours, and that was a good amount of leverage to take advantage of, and it made it fun. You're looking at new puzzles, new problems, and every single business is its own new puzzle. So it was really satisfying after having been in a single cubicle for so many years, and so it was sort of building toward that direction. Paid search ended up being the direction we wanted to take it. We were looking at two things that were sort of core to my passions and experiences at the time. And that was either going to be paid search or attribution. And all the way to like multi-touch attribution, multi-channel attribution across different channels. It's a fascinating puzzle. I still love it. But ultimately, it's easier to sell making money than saving money, and attribution's an efficiency play. I'm still efficiency-minded, so my approach to paid search has always been more.
You know what, though? I read something recently, I think by Profitwell, how there used to be sort of like this 2-to-1 ratio where when you were selling, 2 times out of 3, you're going to have more success if you're saying you're going to make the client more money rather than saving them money.
Right.
But apparently with this current situation, like it's reversed. So your efficiency chops might come in a little bit more useful now.
Well, yeah. And StatBid's definitely seeing that, because we're not a brand building agency in the same sense that other agencies can be. We also don't promise the moon. we will hit your target. But I digress. The rip the Band-Aid off moment that made it really clear that we were going on this particular entrepreneurial venture was I was having a weekly breakfast with my boss. He was the member of our division that was on the e-board, so he was my conduit to the rest of the enterprise, and my mentor, and we were syncing up every weekend or every Wednesday over coffee at an offsite, and one day I was just not even through my coffee yet, and the words, "Yeah, it's just not fun anymore," actually spilled out of my mouth. and I'm like, well, there it is. That's as good as 30 days notice right there. And to his credit, he's always known me better than I realized, or sometimes better than I know myself. So it wasn't a surprise to him at all. It was a surprise to me. but yeah, then we set up a transition plan, and the team continued to be successful even after I left. But it was funny that the actual timing was not a decision I made consciously, but instead one that my lizard brain managed to squeak out through those normal mental filters.
But hey, I mean, it sounded like it was building over time, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, my first job was at IBM, so I know exactly how it feels to be like a cog in a giant machine. And like it's, I think, one of the things, I mean, at least I get personally satisfaction wise, is that when you're working with many clients, especially small businesses, you get to sort of physically feel the joy of helping, and because you see the impact right there. Whereas, like, I think, as a consultant, when I would have these meetings, it would be so removed, right? You'd have sort of these recommendations, but then
even now, StatBid prefers, when we can, to work with privately held companies, because if it's say Jane has this company that she started with her family or something like that. When you get a big win for them, it matters way more. Like even as an external vendor, of a service provider, it's still more satisfying when that win is going directly to the party that appreciates it, and it's even not as an employee, even as a vendor, it's still more satisfying than when that benefit goes to an anonymous shareholder, that's totally separated from the actual point where the rubber hits the road, and that just makes it more fun for us, for sure,
And
because we
how
can
much
relate
do
to
you
it.
feel like, this is something which I've been like, it's one of the reasons I was so focused on like building data queue. It's that I kind of saw this really big asymmetry of information, for lack of a
Yeah.
better term, right? Like, I think you've got sort of these bigger companies where you've got very sophisticated marketing teams who just like really on the ball with a lot of stuff. And then you've got that family owned company who's
Mhm.
just really like struggling to keep their heads above the water. Like, do you see that a lot in the work that you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, not every one of them is like somebody that would be a good candidate as a client for us either. But conveniently, because we're bootstrapped, we're not beholden to any outside interests ourselves, so we get to have whatever conversations we want to have,
Right.
and so I don't have to make money on every conversation, which ended up making networking a lot easier because I can do favors for anybody. I can spend my time, where I can have the most impact, regardless of
Yeah.
whether or not there's a financial relationship. And so that referral, delta, as all those little threads fan out, is a far more satisfying way to build the business for us and for my personality and my style. And I think those those smaller, in-house teams are often taken advantage of. I have excellent competitors, but I also have some competitors that I don't mind taking clients off of their hands for the good of the client too.
Mhm.
And I certainly there the skills that each team brings to the table are distinct, and StatBid specializes in some situations, and we refer to our competitors in
Right.
other instances.
So
But
what I was trying
but
to get
those,
at was
yeah.
more of the kind of conversations you would have with like these customers, right? So when
Mhm.
you, I guess, like when you speak to a smaller customer, I guess you're going to see more rookie mistakes, for lack of a better term.
Well, you'd think
Or
that.
oh,
Um,
okay, maybe not.
yeah. So, honestly, there are types of mistakes that can come about from multiple sources. Like if you
Right.
get a flat tire, it might be that you wore through your tread, or it might be that you drove over a nail, right?
Hmm.
So same result, you have a flat tire.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of things that I see in common between a small to medium sized account that's not doing fantastically and a large account that is struggling as well. The struggles are obviously at a different scale, and one might be more complex in terms of just the sheer size and complexity of the account, but the kinds of mistakes that manifest can be the same, whether it's from naivete or a lack of attention, and the result is the same either way.
What kind of mistakes do you see that's very common? That's really curious.
Yeah, the most brutal one that I still see, surprisingly common, is a lack of proper use of device type adjustments. So that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but the idea
Hmm.
is that for most campaign types, you can tell Google that you want to boost or curtail your bid by a certain percentage. It's just a coefficient. So you say, okay, I'm bidding $1 on this ad group or this keyword or what have you. And then over the top of that, at the campaign level, you say, okay, now for mobile phones, I want to reduce that by 40%. For computers, I want to raise that by 20%. For tablets, I'll leave it alone. Uh, it's an amazingly powerful tool for shaping your investment to match where you expect your return to come from.
Mm.
And if you don't use that feature and you're using one of those campaign types that relies on it, the result is that Google has a bunch, a just glut of low value, relatively speaking, mobile impressions. Now, mobile users are more than half of the business out there for most accounts. So I'm not saying that mobile should be set aside, but you should be mapping your investment proportional to your expected return. And if you don't, your competitors are, and you're left holding the bag, paying full price for discount traffic, and you'll see 80% of your spend gobbled up by the mobile traffic. Meanwhile, the computer traffic, which will generally still convert far more effectively than mobile for most sites, is drops down to 10 or even less percent of the total budget, which is not in the customer's, in the
Right.
client's best interest, and not like in the shopper's best interests either. So um, the good news and bad news is that Google's built-in bid management systems
Hmm.
aren't too bad at that piece. But there's still more cases where I'd prefer to take manual control than hand it over. And that's just because we can take into account different kinds of context than, a machine learning system can be trained around quickly. So like everything in the past 6 weeks, for example,
Right.
who knows whether or not, those models were designed to be flexible enough for that.
Yeah, I mean, when you were talking about this, I was just thinking, I guess it comes down to a question of priorities, right? Because obviously, one of the priorities for Google is to help you sell more, so you keep spending money with them. But the number
Right.
one priority is obviously to move as much inventory, which is views, as possible. So if they've got a whole bunch of views of mobile clicks which they're not able to sell, if they can get you to buy some of that, that's going to make them a lot happier.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're happy to mix a bunch of gristle into the sausage.
So I guess our job right now, at least like what you do, is like get rid of that gristle,
Yeah, or at least make sure that we're paying
minimize it.
appropriate to its actual value.
Right.
Hot dogs are still a profitable segment of the overall meat market, even if we're also, trying to
Not to
sell
hate on
filet
hot
mignon.
dogs. Any other mistakes that like really raise your eyebrows?
Um, the over reliance on those automated systems. Google
Like the
definitely
smart campaigns?
yeah. So Google pitches those as hands off, and they're as close as I've seen.
Hmm.
But when they do drop the ball, it's rather considerable. So the trouble is that you also end up not taking a look at the other kinds of optimization you can be doing.
Hmm.
Um, the bid optimization within those really depends on how closely your data fits the types of models that they're designed. So the more data you have, the easier those smart campaigns have it with trying to optimize to hit your target. But that's like saying that, well, yeah, we built an AI that can beat Mario Brothers, but it can't beat any other harder games or harder settings. It's like, well, okay, but I can't guarantee that this account is always going to be running on easy mode,
Right.
and if it's an easy account with lots and lots of data and very consistent behavior, then do I really need a clever automated bid system? Like I could do that with 2 hours a month of manual attention, and so the trade-offs are considerable because the the other features start to get pulled back because Google wants it to be a one-stop shop. You set it and forget it. So they start removing features from it as they make that more and more automated. And one great example is the negative keywords that you typically be able to apply to a campaign. You can
Hmm.
still apply negative keywords to a smart shopping, but you have to go through your Google rep, and it's a whole thing. And the issue there is that once again, now Google can mix more gristle in there because you can't control the way the search terms are flowing. And so if there are terms like hours, complaints, reviews, warranty, competitors, coupons, these are all different search intents, and those different search intents suggest that that click is worth a different amount to me because they're going to convert at different rates, if at all.
Sure.
And not being able to separate those out can be a liability. It isn't necessarily like a big threat on its own, but it can definitely hide a lot of things under the rug, so to speak. And that's kind of like the way you would need to separate your brand and non-brand terms or trademark and non-trademark terms. If you are royswidgets.com and people are searching for Roy's widgets, and I'm just looking at my account-wide performance and I have that Roy's widgets campaign, well, that's really more like direct traffic, right? And
Hmm.
if I blend that all together, I might be losing money on the other campaign types because it's blended in with that really high return brand activity. It might look like everything's fine, even though if I'd shut off my main campaigns that were spending most of the money, I might have been more profitable without them entirely. Similar, if smaller issues are true, anytime you can't get behind the curtain. And so that's the kind of risk. We still use smart shopping in some campaigns, but we definitely treat it as just one tool in the toolbox, and we will typically try and do some sort of like geo split test to see whether or not it can take advantage of Google's
Right.
proprietary data better than we can take advantage of the client's
So it
proprietary
sounds like
context.
really focusing on finding these pockets of opportunity, which like essentially the machine learning algorithms are going to miss because
Yep.
they're sort of maybe optimized for the crowd, and try to like really bid up on those keywords to try to get as much of that quality gravy as possible.
Yeah. So I only hesitate because anytime bidding is brought up specifically, it almost has to be in the context of your cost per click as a function of your bid and the value per click. And VPC is not a metric that most people use in every single report. And yet, if you think about it, if you need to make, say a 5x ROAS or 500% ROAS or however you want to, you
So
need to
let's
make
define
$5.
ROAS really quickly for people who are
Sure.
listening, return on ad spend.
Yeah, return on ad spend. So the idea being, if I spend $1, I need to see $5 in revenue. That's saying that your target is a return on ad spend of a multiple of 5. There are a lot of problems with ROAS as a metric. It's really, really common. Everybody knows it. In some term or another, ROI is comparable, if slightly different definition. But the issue is not that people can't decide whether it's a multiplier, a dollar value, or a percent, which is also true. It's also not useful. Like you have to take it into its reciprocal before you can actually use it for anything. So if I say I need a 5 to 1 ROAS, here's a budget of $20,000. Quick, how much revenue do you have to make? Well, you can't really control the revenue. That's an output, not an input.
Right.
And so to get from that output to that input, I use cost of sale, which in my vocabulary is the reciprocal of the return on ad spend. So instead of saying for every dollar I need $5 back, I say I only want to spend 20% of my revenue at the end of the day. And the great thing about using a percent of revenue, like we use cost of sale, is that it can be directly compared to your margins. And if your average margin is 30% and you're spending 30% on your ads, you're already breaking even. Right. Yeah, you're already running into trouble, and I think ROAS hides that to some degree. Just it obfuscates it. It's just kicking up dust. So once you have that cost of sale and you have your value per click, all of a sudden something magical happens, and that is your value per click times your cost of sale is your target bid. Whatever magic bidding system you have, whether it's mine or you're doing it by hand or you're using Google's built-in systems or a third party or anything, that is the goal, is to produce that target CPC as your final actual CPC. And the only reason you don't just enter that number in and walk away is because of the volatility of the auction. You don't know what your actual CPC is going to be based on a $1 bid. So if you want to be spending $1, you might be bidding $1.10, $1.20, $5, and so that's where the cleverness of good bidding systems come in to some degree, and that is a view that I find very concrete and satisfying, and surprisingly uncommon in terms of the way people look at paid search.
And I think the keyword there which you used was obfuscate, right? Because it sounds like what you're doing with this cost of sale metric is to make it something that's easier to relate to, because you can actually relate it to your own business metrics. Whereas, if I say 5 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1 ROAS, it sounds great, but in relation to what? Because maybe your cost of sale is actually, 80% for your goods and you only have a 20% margin. Well, then, 5 to 1 is not really going to cut it.
Yeah, and you see that a lot in, anytime I see an interface that uses an intentionally weird way of representing ROAS, I'm even more suspicious. Like if you log into Bing, one, revenue is not a default column. Like in the view, like why would I have to add revenue to this view to make this useful? And then two, instead of showing return on ad spend as a coefficient like Google does, they use not only a percent, but then they add 2 additional sig figs after the decimal point. So it'd be 500.00%. And if you're looking at a number and you're just quickly glancing at it and it says 110%, you're like, fantastic, 110% sounds great. But hold on, that's like spending 48 or something percent of my, yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you added those extra zeros and the number looks big.
Right. I mean, it's almost like the advice here is like to avoid the snake oil, right? Like it's like you've got all these metrics which could just easily make you very confused, but maybe if you can just link all of that to real business metrics that you are aware of, now you're suddenly able to make much better decisions whether the money you're spending is worth it or not.
Yeah, exactly right. And to some degree, everything is always going to be a balance between the granularity of control and the statistical significance of the decisions you're making. Sure. One way to think about it is with date ranges. If you're making a bid decision based on 1 week of data versus 6 weeks of data, the advantage of the shorter date range is that you can respond more quickly to changes in the market, but your certainty is much, much lower because the sample size is smaller. Same thing with granularity within the account. Some people still like to talk about, specific individual keyword bids. And there are contexts where that conversation can still make sense, but this isn't 2012 anymore. And we should be looking at things in an appropriate level of granularity for the amount of data we have. And I think that's one of those challenges that's identical, whether you're looking at a big company or a tiny startup. That specificity of bidding control is an attractive lure, but the more you trace that specificity, the less and less statistically relevant your decisions are, and the more you're just sort of wading into a sea of noise.
That is such a critical point that I think it's just worth repeating because I think a lot of us really get really attracted by this idea that, if you're doing an A/B test and this group is doing 40% more than better than the other one, you think, well, right, that's clearly the one I should do. But if you don't look into the specificity of like why that happened, do I have enough data points to justify this? Is it statistically significant? Well, then you might go off on this completely incorrect tangent because of some wrong data. So I think the fact that data can lie to you is something very important to take away.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of the day-to-day decisions that marketers are making, we forget that there are statistics going on under the hood, whether we acknowledge them and use them to our advantage or not.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are getting better about the way they think about A/B tests in terms of significance. But if you're just going through your account and you're saying, okay, well, I have this VPC, I want to spend this percent of my revenue, and you're just generating those decisions, if you don't acknowledge that the sample size and the difference in conversion rate or value per click both play into that significance, then you could be rolling the dice on smaller and smaller and smaller sample sizes, and that can cumulatively add up to just chaotic behavior of the account. And it wouldn't be obvious how to track that down because it would be coming from all directions simultaneously.
So I think this is like a really good time because we've got a very solid grounding now on like all the gotchas of PPC and now I think maybe people listening in, especially the ones who aren't very familiar with the topic, are probably feeling like, "Whoa, that's that's a lot." Why don't we walk through an example? I know you've got something to share with us today, where
Yeah.
let's just talk through that, and I think it would be very helpful for people to try to visualize their own website while you're talking through this example.
Yeah, absolutely. So the client that I got permission to share is Connecting Threads, and they're a member of a parent company that that includes knitting and crochet sites as well. But Connecting Threads is focused on quilters, and they're Connecting Threads and its sibling sites are well known in these industries. My wife's a crocheter and knitter, and I have plenty of of their logos in my garage right now, and that's common. They're as well known to people who are really into the hobby as Joanne's is to those of us who are not. So it was a fun account to come into, and the challenges that they were facing originally, and this has been a few years since we started working together, were related mostly to having all of their accounts sort of mixed together. And in this case, because people know their name so well, there's a lot of brand activity, a lot of people searching for Connecting Threads as part of their search. And there are reasons to take a look at whether or not paying for those types of brand ads makes sense for each business. I'm generally in favor of it under very strict cost controls, but it's worth A/B testing for incrementality for each site, because some of them don't come out that way. But we tested with Connecting Threads and its siblings and found that while it's unclear where those shoppers would then go if they didn't click on the ad, they obviously weren't all coming through organic. And so that's where you measure that incrementality. You have to compare date range to date range, which isn't my preferred solution, but it was effective enough at the time to come up with a pretty conclusive proof that some small amount of investment was very definitely worth doing. And it's interesting to point out that that's the combination. It's not
So
that you
just
should
so I
spend a lot.
understand, the hypothesis here was you've got a X number of people coming via organic, but the
Right.
hypothesis was that if you didn't run this ad, you were losing people who might have clicked on it through the ad, who were never going to come via organic anyway. So you were doing sort of a comparison by date just to show that, well, we didn't change anything with organic, but just with this new ad, we were able to bring in people via the paid channel.
Yeah. So the hypothesis you're testing is that organic searches are going to pick up when you remove the brand campaigns that you were running above them. And
Right.
so if you don't see any change in your organic traffic, or your organic traffic goes down, or and so on, the result is that that hypothesis wasn't supported by that data, and so you move on to the next hypothesis. Um, but the interesting part of that is, because brand activity makes up such a large portion of their ecosystem, because people know their name, and because of their history of being a catalog company as well, and people still love their catalogs. There's a lot of this direct and kind of brand activity. Fantastic for the brand, means that they've really got their hooks in their customers, and so they were always looking for ways to improve the ratio of new customers to existing customers, because they do have a pretty good recurring purchase rate. It's basically a replenishable good, especially for things like the fabric and yarns and threads and things. And so that was at odds with the fact that the majority of their ads activity was coming from people that were already searching for their name.
Right.
And those searches were mixed out throughout the rest of the account. And so I see that frequently as well. It's not quite as devastating as mixing up the device type bid adjustments can be, but over a long period of time, it can still be, tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of lost opportunity or wasted spend if you let all this stuff just get mixed together. And the reason for that is if you imagine, 90% of your spend is going into your non-brand activity, your shopping campaigns, your category level text campaigns, things that are related to your product and not your brand. And 10% of your spend could be going to brand, let's say. But if brand is 50% of your revenue, then your overall ROAS is going to look rosy, because brand is different, and brand is getting mixed in and just completely changing the apparent behavior of the entire account. It's like adding just a little bit of cream changes the color of coffee very, very quickly. Same kind of thing is true here. If you add just a little bit of that brand cream, that black non-brand coffee starts looking lighter and lighter very, very quickly. And so you can end up with what appears to be a healthy account that is actually losing money on the primary thing that it should be profitable on. And while Connecting Threads wasn't in quite that bad a shape, it was definitely afflicted with that kind of.
So let's look at that example. So you're talking about a 90-10 spend, and in this case, you're saying brand is influencing 50% of the revenue. So then the idea there would be to make that 80-20, 70-30. Is that where you're going with this?
Well, so what we advocate is trying to separate out the two types of searches so that you can give them different targets. So, if you say, I want to spend 30% of revenue to attract new customers, then that's fine. And that's what you should do with your non-brand campaigns. But over on the brand stuff, maybe that only needs 10%, or maybe it only needs 5% or 1%. And I recommend testing to find where that roll-off is on the diminishing returns curve. And so then you just run that at whatever is appropriate to capture as much of it as still is incremental, and then manage the non-brand as totally separate. There, on some brands like this one, where the brand activity is very broad, people really know that name. There's also the gray area in the middle, which we call brand adjacent, where it's like Connecting Threads plus some descriptive
Right, where the
words
brand
for the
becomes
product.
a verb, like Google.
No. More like if you were searching Connecting Threads quilting fabric.
Okay.
As opposed to just Connecting Threads or something. So it is no longer quite as similar to direct traffic. It's more like an organic search, and so those kinds of things can be handled on a case-by-case basis. But the first idea of just taking the two primary groups and separating them out and handling their expected return on ad spend separately is enough of a game changer that it really tidies up accounts. Especially over the sort of medium term. We're proud of what we were able to do for profitability above and beyond, top line revenue growth for sure.
That makes a lot of sense. So essentially, but I think that third point which you talked about, where people are going to be looking for sort of brand plus keyword, that's almost like a luxury, right? That's when you really made it.
Good problem to have.
People are like associating. So that's a very good problem to have, I think.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. So you want to both facilitate that shopper and not let that shopper cloud your view of what new to file customers are doing as well.
Right. So is there something like, where we can maybe like do a quick screen share of their site, and then we can talk through sort of the assumptions that you had when you talked to them? Maybe did you guys do any specific landing pages to capture these
So
queries?
not so much. I can definitely show you what we're looking at in terms of the behavior though. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
All right.
Here we go. Okay, so because we are so focused on the optimization of accounts, we don't do as much work with like landing pages as other agencies do. Some of them do amazing work, but we're really not tooled for that kind of like heavy content work or getting into a client's e-commerce platform and actually building templates and things like that. We don't have designers and the like. So our approach is a little bit different, but the idea is that if we can identify those two different shopping behaviors and handle them separately, then we can manage the profitability far more effectively. And so when you search for something like quilting fabric online right here, we want to be participating in this kind of search, obviously, because it's somebody who isn't already familiar with the brand. And we're currently seated at the second position after Etsy. Etsy, obviously being a massive brand, is just sort of bombing in any home craft term is definitely going to see their share of Etsy, and you can see that they're buying their way to the top spot there as well. But in the next slot over is Connecting Threads, and Connecting Threads will show up a few more times as well. And those top of funnel searches are great, but they do have an incredible lag. So for this kind of search, if I'm bidding on a 7-day window, that's not even wide enough to even see the revenue of a click that was placed that would eventually convert, because the conversion might not be for another 14 days. Most sites, 80% of the traffic converts, if it's going to at all, within the first day or two. And some of these high funnel terms and some niches take way longer. And so that shopping lag can actually
So how do you identify that conversion window? Are you just saying it's completely relevant related to how top of the funnel the query is? So if it's like very long tail, then it's a lower window? Or like, how do you think through defining that conversion window? Because I think for some of the viewers, I think even the concept of conversion window is new.
Yeah, that's fair. The vast majority of the available data is going to be just in the attribution reports within Google Ads for that kind of thing. The challenge with that is it's only using account-wide data, and it typically uses relatively short periods of time. It can look at 30 to 90 days. And I like to use as much data as I can in a lot of these cases for especially going into Q4 and things like that. So that's the first stop. That gets you an idea of whether or not that account behaves like other accounts. So if you go in there and you look, okay, the time since the first click, the first day only gets me 60% of revenue. You're looking at a laggier account. You should use longer date ranges. But if you want to get into more specifics than that, you can still jump over to Google Analytics and other tools like that. And the more complex, the two-dimensional version of that same picture is hidden in their cohort analysis. So if you look at those cohorts, those tools will still use that 1 to 2 days, 2 to 3 days back kind of windows, and you can plot that against your conversion likelihood and your revenue density. So with a little bit of context, you can start to use segmentation and analytics to get a better picture of that. But you will, even without thinking too hard about the conversion window settings or the attribution settings, you can think of it more in terms of the value per click as measured within a finite time range. So if I was looking at this campaign, for example, and I was looking at the past 28 days, which is a reasonable chunk of time and gets most of the revenue that you can expect from those clicks, these high funnel terms are going to have a lower value per click than one that's closer to the point of checkout. Say they're searching specifically for a product that is on our site. That's going to convert more highly because they're farther along, lower in the funnel in their shopping experience. And so that's going to translate into a difference in conversion rate, and that difference in conversion rate will then propagate into a difference in value per click. And with the value per click difference, that then can affect bidding decisions. And so it all goes back to that conversion rate, but the goal is to identify how much is this worth to me so that I can bid appropriately.
And I think you just already identified this sort of rule of thumb here, right? So the higher it is up the funnel, where it's more of like a curiosity search term, then you just have to expect that the time range for conversion is going to be higher.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's actually another dimension that comes up in conversation quite a lot, and that is competitors' search terms. And while there are issues with, how do you make a good quality score for somebody else's sort of core term without using their term, even before you get to anything like the actual implementation of what's the landing page experience, what's the ad going to say, all of those sort of weird situations that you have to think through when you're thinking about trying to capture your competitors' traffic. But if you just think about it in terms of the search funnel, before you get to any of that complicated stuff, it's already more expensive to reach up your own search funnel to pull people down to the point of checkout. Now imagine trying to reach up and out of your funnel and into a neighbor's funnel and then pull them down. It's obviously going to be expensive. And so while there are a few anecdotes here and there where it's been deployed in a successful context, generally that's the thing that slows it down. It's just the conversion rate is so low because they're so far away from the bottom of your funnel.
So for someone just starting out, would you say good advice is to really just exclusively target long tail kind of keywords which are as specific as possible?
I don't think so, and it's partially because it's so laborious that you're never going to get your time back. The ways to go after that same kind of opportunity appear to be through shopping campaigns, because they're not keyword specific. They're using your product title and description along with other product data to handle matching. And so you'll get a lot of good long tail activity out of your shopping campaign if you have a well maintained set of product data in your catalog. And then we're also seeing that dynamic search ads seem to do better for those kind of long tail behaviors. We tend to prefer to more carefully craft the shopper experience and the bidding for head terms, the most important high volume or high converting terms. But as soon as you get into the long tail stuff, if you're manually managing a standard text campaign, you'll quickly hit that threshold where Google says, the search volume's too low. We're not even going to try. And you can sometimes bid your way out of that hole and get it going and then bring your bids back down. But the DSAs don't rely on that same kind of keyword specificity. And so we are seeing that as a tool that can be used to capture that long tail. And it can be done at a relatively good efficiency. But because DSAs are so automated in terms of their content, I generally will try and keep them on a shorter leash than I would a shopping campaign or something else, just to avoid letting them run amok.
And we're already seeing an example of a shopping campaign here, right? These
Yes.
are clearly just like products which you guys have, I guess, helped configure and showing up on the ad, and it's a very good placement, because at least with shopping ads, the intent is very clear. If you're going to click on that, you're clearly an intent to buy.
Yep. Yeah, exactly right. And if we try something like connecting threads fabric, you can see that it'll still host shopping ads, but the inclusion of those connecting threads terms matches with our descriptions and our product titles and our site name, so that while we happen to have all of the shopping ads that are served, it's not necessarily always the case. And so this reflects the fact that Google recognizes that connecting threads represents a behavioral pattern, and we are able to capitalize on it and therefore pay them more per click than our competitors could for targeting our search term. So this is sort of the example from the other side of why you wouldn't want to try and come at connecting threads customers from your account, because there's obviously a pattern here that Google's connecting with.
And talk us through a little bit about Google Shopping. I know for one, they've made it free, if I'm not wrong. It seems so. That's a pretty big update, right? So maybe we can talk about that, and then after, I wanted to ask you about any tips on how to manage that well, because clearly it's a very, very good source of traffic.
Yeah, the challenges facing shopping campaigns right now are very much related to the changes in shopping behavior that 2020 brought to us. And so in general, there are basic logistical steps. You need to get a product feed out of your e-commerce system and into Merchant Center, and you jump through the hoops. And once you get the campaign running, you have a lot of control over it. If you choose to use Google's Smart Shopping, that's pretty much it. You did it. If you have tracking installed, it's good to go. If you use a standard campaign, like I will generally prefer to, unless there's a mitigating circumstances, then you're able to start to shape your investment across those products based on your anticipated margin. Maybe these categories have higher margin than these, so I would be willing to spend more of the revenue on those than these. But those are all sort of long-term, just logistical details. And Google's done a pretty good job of making this one of the easiest marketplaces to participate in as a result. It's still plenty of hoops to jump through, but the tools are good. And if you have the time and expertise, it isn't that hard to manage. But because 2020 is so weird, things are different. And so we've seen instances where rain shadows will appear behind spikes in behavior. So, if a smart shopping campaign, or even most other bidders as well, see a sudden increase that maybe lasts for a week and then drops back down, say if you were selling webcams or toilet paper, or
like home office equipment.
Yeah, home office equipment. Freezers, appliances, anything that is reflecting a difference in behavior, those changes in behavior then will come back down to whatever the new normal is. Maybe that's as low as it was before. Maybe it's higher for other reasons. But if you're just using a moving average, and that is the basis of what these models have to use, then you'll end up sort of with this rain shadow. And the metaphor, I think, is pretty apt, because within that window, if you're just looking at your VPC, your value per click, well, it had a bunch of revenue in it, so it'll look high. But even if it's dropped back down, you've aggregated over the top of it. You've applied too much Bondo, and it's no longer holding together. And so we are carefully watching the sort of intra-week behavior changes within these accounts, because some of them that are spiking are coming back down off those peaks faster than others. And it comes down to three major patterns, and these are all having big impacts, and it's almost difficult to tell which is the largest. The first one being the new shopper behavior. New behavior means they have new needs. So like you said, webcams, home office equipment, if more people are working from home, that's a change in behavior, and that change in behavior results in a change in needs, and the change in needs is different shopping behavior. So we see that kind of pattern, and that is likely to smooth out over time as that demand is satisfied. But it's going to still come down to a higher baseline. Another change that's similar is offline to online conversion, and this is something that I was just confirming on Connecting Threads, for example, this morning. Searches that indicate an intent to find an online supply of something are up pretty universally, and in some cases dramatically, 10, 20 times as much volume for searches that include the term online, for example.
Yeah, I think you shared that graph with me earlier. Like, no, that was incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And so that represents people not wanting to go to a physical store, or if the physical store isn't available right now, or something. So that's demand that came from somewhere else that is now online. Some of that will return, not all of it will. So that'll also have a higher baseline afterwards, and we need to be able to follow that down. And then the third one is Amazon. In its participation in the Google Ads platform. So obviously Amazon's behavior as a marketplace is bonkers too. But they're also a massive advertiser on Google Ads most of the time. And right now they've pulled back. I believe they still haven't come back into any of the categories that I'm paying attention to yet. And so when your biggest competitor vanishes, you suddenly can access either more audience, or more audience for how much you were willing to pay, because there's one less player bidding you up in those auctions. So that, on the other hand, is far more temporary, and we expect to switch back to a more typical behavior once Amazon comes back for its slice of the pie. So
if you talk about advice for someone listening in right now, right, with all of these trends that you talked about, would you say, is there any good reason not to get your stuff in Google Shopping? Because it sounds like a no-brainer.
As long as you understand what you want to spend as a percentage of your revenue. I talk to enough folks where they say, well, I want to spend about $10,000 a month. Well, that's not good enough, actually. If that's where you're at, you're not yet to the point where I would recommend pulling the trigger. Go back and look at your margins and say, okay, if I spent $10,000, how much revenue would I need to be happy with the result? And then you can just flip that around and say, if it was $100,000, then you know you should be spending 10% of your revenue on those ads, and keep that brand separation in mind, so you're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But yeah, it's if you have an e-commerce site and you have the ability to either export or create a product feed, and that can literally just be a Google sheet if you have a small catalog, and you have the expertise on hand to get your tracking installed. Those are the big pieces, and as long as you manage your bids with that percent of revenue ad spend in mind, you can't go too far off. You have to stay on top of it and be aware of things like the differences in device types and the difference of behavior across the different categories within your catalog.
Right.
As long as you're not treating a $10 product and a $1,000 product as if they're the same, you're probably on the right track.
I think we can kill the screen share where I think it seems
Sure.
like we're done with the topic, but yeah, like I think your approach is very, very appreciated, because most of the time it's almost like jump in and then see what happens. Whereas it sounds like you're really talking about just, well, plan your outcome first before you jump in, so that you can judge for yourself whether the campaign's going well or not.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also work your way backwards into figuring out whether or not the budget you have in mind is plausible. If your site has a 1% conversion rate, well, then you need to get 100 clicks on average for every conversion you're going to get. So you can't bid more per click than you could have afforded to produce that conversion. If you think about it as if these averages are individual transactions at a physical register, it starts to make it more concrete. And it's not magic. It's not it seems complicated. There's a lot of ways to make it complicated, and those are what we specialize in. But if you start with the idea that different shoppers exhibiting different behaviors are worth different amounts, and their behavior across these different sections of my account, be it my product catalog categories within my shopping campaign, or whether it's search terms within my text campaigns, and you're investing proportional to your expected return, then it's all going to be philosophically equivalent in the end, and that's really what we advocate for. So I like to reinvest rather than speculatively invest into an account, and that means my approach isn't the right approach for everybody. If you just got a big investment and VC wants to really drive volume ahead of profits, that makes perfect sense. It's just not exactly what our philosophy is designed for, and that's because we specialize in that sort of mid-market for sure.
And I think a lot of people are in that bucket, right? Because especially now, I don't think too many VCs are throwing money out there. I think investment is definitely dried up, and so it seems like that it's always an age-old battle, right? Whether you grow organically and sustainably, or do you just like throw money at the problem and try to grow till someone acquires you? It looks like column A is the place to be right now.
That's home field advantage for us.
Hey, right. This has been really good. I think we covered a lot of ground today. What would you say are the three major takeaways for someone listening in on getting in on the PPC market, so to speak, with this new climate?
Sure. Yeah. The first one is definitely just get a handle on your budget as a percent of anticipated revenue. It's going to facilitate good margin decisions in the future. It'll set you up for being able to make better and better decisions over time, and fold your paid channels and organic channels back together in a more constructive way than just considering it as a cost line on your P&L. The second one would definitely be keep an eye on device types. If your COS or your return on ad spend is similar across those different device segments, then you're doing fine. If one of them is double the other, then there's an opportunity to improve things and make your dollars work harder. And then if you do have a brand that is recognized, even among a small audience, you do want to separate out the brand behavior, even if it's just for reporting purposes, so you can get a handle on how much your non-brand is actually costing you. Because I bet, I've seen that too many accounts are losing money without realizing it, patting themselves on the back.
Awesome. There's that old saying, right? That when you don't know much about something, you think you know everything, but then the more you start learning about it, the more you realize you don't know. And maybe there are a couple of viewers thinking, "Wow, this is really interesting, and I really want to get into it." Like, how can they get in touch with you? I'm sure they'd love to find out more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I love to talk shop, so my door is absolutely open. You can find me on LinkedIn at Roy Steves. You can email me directly at roy@statbid.com. That's fine too. So if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email, I'm always happy to jump on a Zoom call even. And frankly, I am happy to lend an extra pair of eyes, even on accounts that wouldn't be a candidate as a prospective client for my company. That's not the only thing that I'm excited about and get up in the morning to do. So if 10 minutes of my time can save you hundreds or thousands or a bunch of hours as well, that's a conversation I'd love to have. Because worst case scenario, if I have the same conversation 5 times, well, then I'll write a blog article and everyone will be better off for it. So definitely take me up on it. I love helping people and I love making an outsized impact. And this has been a great vehicle for allowing me to do so.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to hear. Roy, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Cheers.